Wyoming Territory, spring of 1874. The wind came down from the bighorns sharp as a blade, and Beatrice Ellwood stood alone on the edge of a dirt road, her good hand clutching the worn strap of her carpetbag, the other hidden in the folds of her shawl. The left side of her face bore the angry, pale scars of a fire 2 winters ago, jagged reminders of the night her husband left and never came back. He had not even looked her in the eye when he walked out. Just packed his saddlebag and said, "I cannot stay with someone I do not recognize." She watched him ride off into the snow, her face still burning from the cabin fire that had taken part of her skin, her pride, and everything she thought was safe. Since then, she had wandered through towns that looked away or looked too long. The coins she had left were few. Her voice, once strong, had grown quiet. She had no family left, nowhere to go until a letter from a cousin's widow in Cheyenne promised her work mending linens. But by the time she arrived, the woman had passed on. That morning, Beatrice had been asked to leave the boarding house. "Too many complaints," the landlady said, eyes darting from the scar down Beatrice's cheek to the burn that curled across her neck. "Makes the children cry." So she stood there now, in a town that had offered her nothing but silence and closed doors, with nowhere to sleep, no place to belong. A horse snorted behind her. She turned just as a tall man in a dusted coat dismounted near the post office. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, his hat pulled low, a rifle strapped to his saddle. His eyes were the color of warm soil, and his face bore a quiet strength, not hardened, just steady. He noticed her immediately, not in the way others did. He looked at her like she was a person. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "You all right?" She tightened her grip on the bag. "I am fine." "You do not look fine," she blinked, unsure how to answer. "I am Hayes Buckner," he said, voice low and calm. "I came in for supplies. Heading back to my place out west of here. If you need help, I can offer it. I do not take charity." "I am not offering charity," he said. "Just a ride and a roof for the night. My ranch is quiet. You would be safe there." She hesitated. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. "Why would you help me?" he shrugged. "Because I would want someone to help my sister if she were standing out here like this." She studied his face. There was no pity in it, just something steady, honest. Beatrice nodded once. "All right." They rode in silence, the sun dipping low over the hills. His horse was strong and sure-footed, and he let her ride while he walked beside. She did not speak, and he did not press her for words. The ranch came into view at dusk. 3 outbuildings, a wide porch, and a barn with a broken shutter. It was plain but clean, with smoke curling from the chimney. "You live here alone?" she asked. Hayes nodded. "Since my father passed 2 years ago, just me and the horses now." "Sometimes I take in strays." She looked at him. "Is that what I am?" He smiled, not mocking, just soft. "No, ma'am, you are someone who needed a place to land." Inside, the cabin was warm, the walls smelled of cedar. He showed her to a room with a narrow bed, clean linens, and a small window that looked out over the hills. "I will not stay long," she said. He nodded. "All right, but you can rest tonight." She slept deeper than she had in months. In the morning, Beatrice found a bowl of warm oats waiting on the kitchen table. Hayes was outside, chopping wood. She watched him from the window, steady hands, strong back, quiet grace. Later, she found him in the barn, tending to a mare with a deep gash on her flank. "She got caught in wire last week," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Beatrice knelt beside the mare. "May I?" He stepped back and let her work. She cleaned the wound with water and herbs from her bag, speaking low to the animal. She had always been good with injured things. "You know what you are doing," Hayes said. "I was a healer's daughter before I married." He nodded, watching her, not her scars, but her hands, the way she moved, the calm she gave the horse. "You could stay," he said. She looked up. "Why?" "Because you do not flinch from work. And because I like the quiet with you in it." That night they shared stew by the fire. She told him her name. He did not ask about the scars. She told him anyway, how the cabin caught fire, how her husband left before the skin had even mended. Hayes listened, jaw tight, eyes dark. "You deserved better," he said. She looked into the flames. "I used to be pretty." "You are still something," he said softly. She turned her face to him. "Do you really see me?" He leaned forward, close enough to touch. "Yes, I do." She did not cry. just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, she helped him mend fence. They fell into rhythm, passing nails, holding boards, hammering side by side. At midday, he handed her a cup of water and their fingers touched. She did not pull away. That night, she stood at the porch rail while thunder rolled in the distance. Hayes stepped beside her. "Storm's coming," he said. "I am not afraid of storms." He looked at her, really looked. "You are braver than most." She met his gaze. "You are kinder than most." Rain began to fall, soft at first. He did not move, neither did she. "I will need to ride into town next week," he said. "Pick up some seed." She nodded. "I will come. I want to see the look on their faces when I walk in with you." His mouth lifted, just barely. "You would do that?" "I want them to see I am not hiding anymore." He reached for her hand, slow and sure. "Then let them see how proud I am to be beside you." She laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "Then let them see." The wind carried the scent of turned earth and pine as Hayes led the mule wagon along the narrow trail that veered south from the main road, where the hills began folding into one another like the long backs of sleeping animals. Beatrice sat beside him, her hands resting in her lap, the brim of her borrowed hat casting a shadow across her eyes. She hadn't worn a hat in over a year. The last one had burned with the cabin. She hadn't asked where they were going. He just said, "There's something I want to show you," and she'd nodded, trusting him in a way that felt new and strange and like it had been waiting inside her all along. They passed no one. Just the hush of land left to itself, the occasional hawk circling above, and the creak of the wagon axle keeping time. A pair of quail burst from the brush, and Hayes slowed the mule, glancing her way. "You still wake in the night." "I don't jump at shadows anymore," she said. "But I don't sleep easy." He let that settle between them, then asked, "Did you have a favorite season before?" "I liked the first frost," she said. "When the grass turned silver before the sun touched it," he nodded, considering that. "I think you'd like the ridge up ahead." The wagon crested a rise, and the land opened into a wide basin rimmed with low rock bluffs. Below them, a stand of cottonwoods shimmered in the breeze, their new leaves pale and trembling. A creek cut through the middle, shallow and winding, with a small bridge made of rough-hewn logs stretching across it. Hayes brought the mule to a stop. "This is where my mother used to bring me after planting season. She'd pack bread and boiled eggs, and we'd sit under those trees while she told me stories about the people who came before." Beatrice studied the trees, the bridge, the way the water caught the light. "It's quiet." She said quiet places remember better. Beatrice stepped down from the wagon. Her boots sank slightly into the soft earth. She walked toward the creek, pausing at the bridge. The boards were worn smooth by time, and she ran her fingers along the rail. "Why bring me here?" she asked, not turning. "Because you looked like someone who hadn't been offered something beautiful in a long while." She turned then, her mouth parted just slightly. "You think I need beauty? I think you deserve it." She looked back toward the trees. "I used to hum while I worked. I haven't made a sound in over a year that wasn't for someone else's comfort." "Then hum here," he said. "There's no one to hush you." She didn't, not yet, but she walked down to the water's edge and crouched, trailing her fingers just above the surface. She stayed like that a long time until a crow called from the bluff and the wind shifted. When she stood, Hayes hadn't moved. He was watching her, not with expectation, but with a stillness that steadied her. "My father never said much," she said. "But when I was little, he used to braid my hair every morning before school. Even when it fell out in patches after the illness, he still braided what was left." Hayes stepped closer but didn't touch her. "I wish I'd known him." She tilted her head. "You wish for impossible things." "I think most good things begin that way." They walked the creek together, not speaking, until the sun lowered enough to stretch their shadows long across the grass. When they returned to the wagon, Beatrice climbed up without help. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, and though she didn't smile, something about her face had softened. That night, she sat at the kitchen table while Hayes cleaned a brace of grouse he'd shot earlier. The knife flashed in the lamplight, his hands moving with practiced ease. "I'd like to work," she said suddenly. "Properly, not just taking up space." He paused, wiped the blade. "What kind of work?" Whatever there is, sewing, preserving, I know how to render tallow and make soap. I can keep books too if you keep them. I do. Then let me do something with my hands, he nodded once. Tomorrow then. She stood, walked to the shelf above the stove, and took down a small crock. Her voice was quiet. This salve it'll help that mare's leg. But it needs to be warmed before you apply it. He looked at her, and something passed between them, not spoken but understood. Later, when the fire was low and the house held the hush of late hours, Beatrice stood at the window of her room, the curtain drawn just enough to see the moonlit field beyond the barn. She could hear Hayes moving about in the next room, his steps careful, the creak of the floorboards familiar now. She touched her fingers to the scar that ran from jaw to collarbone, then lowered her hand. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel ashamed. She turned from the window, pulled the quilt over her shoulders, and let herself rest. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The hens had gone quiet at dusk, settled in their roosts behind the barn. Beatrice stood in the dimming light, sleeves rolled, apron damp from the day's work. The kettle of lye soap she'd boiled that afternoon still sat cooling near the shed, and her arms ached from stirring. But there was a kind of ache that felt earned, and she carried that with her now. Hayes was in the pasture, mending a break in the south fence line. She could see his outline against the sky, shoulders bent as he tied wire to the cedar posts he'd cut last week. He hadn't spoken much that morning, just passed her a tin of salve and said the calf's leg was healing. She'd nodded, and they'd gone about their separate tasks. It was how they moved now, like two parts of a thing learning to work together without forcing shape. She stepped into the kitchen, where the scent of cured ham and onions lingered from supper. The window above the sink was cracked open, and the breath of cool evening air stirred the curtain. The house had begun to feel lived in again, not like she had taken up space, but like she belonged to it. The floor creaked behind her. Hayes stepped in, boots dusty, shirt clinging to his arms from sweat. "I poured water for you," she said, nodding toward the basin. "Appreciate it." As he washed, she cleared the table, stacking plates with care. He dried his hands on the towel beside the stove, watching her. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "You ever work with bees?" She raised an eyebrow. "Not directly, but I knew a woman who kept them. Why, I've got a wild hive near the edge of the north field. Thought I might build a box, try to draw them in. Could use another pair of hands. I'll help," she said, "but I won't be stung for nothing. Then I'll make sure the honey's worth it." She shook her head, a quiet laugh slipping free. "You have a way of making the strangest things sound agreeable." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "That your way of saying you don't mind me?" She met his eyes. "No. It's my way of saying I feel steadier when you're nearby." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. Then he stepped forward, slow and sure, and held out a folded piece of paper. "Found this in the ledger drawer," he said. "My mother's handwriting. She kept notes on how she made her preserves. Figured you might want to see." Beatrice opened it carefully. The ink had faded around the edges, but the words were clear. "She had a steady hand," she said. "She did most things with care." She traced one line with her finger. "Maybe I'll try this plum recipe come summer. I'd like to taste that." She looked up. "You always this certain about things?" "No. But I know a good thing when it sets foot in my kitchen and starts cleaning out the dust that's been sitting for years." She folded the paper, tucked it into her apron. "You think I've cleared out your dust? I think you've stayed long enough that I forget what the house felt like before you did." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "You ever think about what it means, me being here?" "I think about it most nights. And I don't want you to leave." Beatrice stepped closer. The lamplight caught the edge of her scar, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not sure I know how to stay," she whispered. "You already are." She reached out, her hand finding his, fingers fitting without effort. "Then maybe I'll keep learning." Hayes brought her hand up, kissed the back of it slow, like he was making a promise. "Then I'll keep making space for you to do just that." They stood like that until the last of the light faded. Outside, the crickets sang, and the wind curled through the eaves like a blessing. By the second week of May, the creek behind the north field had narrowed to a silver ribbon. its banks thick with wild mustard and the first of the chokecherry blooms. Beatrice walked the pasture fence line with a linen sack in one hand and a willow basket in the other, collecting fallen branches for kindling and marking spots where the posts leaned too far. She paused near the cottonwoods where the hive had taken root in a hollowed trunk, the bees busy and unbothered by her quiet presence. She crouched, watching their steady rhythm, then glanced at the wooden box Hayes had set nearby, half-constructed and waiting for the right moment to coax the colony in. The work of keeping things alive, she was learning, required more patience than force. When she returned to the house, Hayes was sitting on the porch steps, his shirt sleeves rolled and his ledger open across his knees. He tapped the end of his pencil twice, then looked up. "I've been thinking about expanding the south pen," he said. "Spring calves will need more room." She set the basket down and brushed dust from her skirt. "You'll need someone to help dig post holes." His mouth curved slightly. "You offering?" "I've got 2 good hands and nothing better to do. Then I'll sharpen the auger." She sat beside him, not close enough to touch. The porch boards were warm from the sun. A hawk traced a high arc above the barn. "Where would you have gone?" he asked. "If I hadn't been at the post office that day." She watched the hawk disappear behind the ridge. "North, maybe. I'd heard there was work in Fort Laramie, laundry or sewing. I wasn't thinking much past the next place to sleep." "I'm glad you didn't go." She turned toward him. "I've thought about that day more than I should admit." "Me too." He closed the ledger, set it aside. "I can't say I believe in fate. But I do believe in people crossing paths at the right time." She folded her hands in her lap. "Do you think I'm healing?" "I think you've been mending longer than you realized." The breeze shifted and a horse whinnied from the barn. She looked toward the pasture, then back at him. "I haven't written anyone in months," she said. "Not since before Cheyenne. There's no one left to write to." He didn't speak, just let her finish. "But I've started thinking about what I'd say if I did, not to anyone in particular, just what I'd want someone to know." "What would you tell them?" "That I planted carrots last week and they're already pushing through. That I remembered a song my mother used to hum when she sewed. And that there's a man here who listens without interrupting." Hayes rested his forearms on his knees, head bowed slightly. "I'd tell them," he said, "that you've changed the sound of this house." She went still. "You used to talk about not knowing how to stay," he continued. "But I think you've been doing it every day." She looked at him then, really looked. His voice wasn't soft, not exactly. It was steady in a way that made her feel rooted. "I thought I'd never belong anywhere again," she said. He reached over, slow as always, and touched her wrist. Just enough to feel the warmth of his hand. "You do here." She didn't cry. Not out of pride, but because something inside her had gone still and full, the way a pond quiets before dawn. Later, she wrapped the kindling in a scrap of old muslin and stacked it by the hearth. Hayes stayed outside, oiling the hinges on the barn door. When he came in, dusk had fallen. She had already lit the lamp but left the fire low, the room glowing amber. He paused in the doorway. "You hungry?" She nodded. "But I'll cook." He didn't argue. Just watched her move through the kitchen with a familiarity that didn't feel borrowed anymore. As the skillet warmed and the scent of sage and cornmeal filled the air, he stepped behind her, not close enough to crowd, but near enough she could feel the space they shared. "You planning on claiming that old hive for good?" she asked. "I was waiting to see if you'd keep showing up with that basket." She turned, wooden spoon in hand. "Then I suppose I'll need to see it through." He held her gaze. "I hope you stay through more than the honey." She didn't answer right away, just met his eyes and nodded, a single, quiet promise. The first real heat came in mid-June, slow and dry, curling the edges of leaves and driving the cattle into the shade by midday. The creek near the cottonwoods had dwindled to a quiet trickle, and the hive box Hayes built now thrummed with bees, docile and busy, drawn to the comb Beatrice had coaxed into place with smoke and patience. That morning she stood by the side shed, brushing flour from her skirt. She'd spent the better part of the week preserving rhubarb and setting jars to cool along the windowsill. The kitchen smelled of vinegar and clove, and the house had taken on a rhythm that felt not borrowed, but shaped by her hands. Hayes came around the corner with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder and a shallow nick on his forearm. He held it up without a word. Fence wire, Barb's snag, south end. She took his arm in both hands and led him to the porch bench. The cut was shallow but dirty. She poured water from the tin basin and began cleaning it with short, practiced motions. "I can do it," he said. "I know," she replied, not looking up. They stayed quiet while she worked, the only sound the low drone of bees from the meadow and the wind shifting dry grass against the porch steps. "You've been quiet lately," he said. She wrapped the cloth tighter than necessary and tied it with a knot. "I signed my name yesterday in your ledger." He blinked once. "You wrote it like you belonged here. I wrote it beneath yours." Hayes looked down at the bandage, then up at her face. "I didn't see it. I wanted it there before I asked." "Asked what?" She sat back against the post. "If this is still just shelter, or if it's become something you want to build with me." He didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked out toward the short hills beyond the pasture. The sun had dipped low, painting the fields in long gold strokes. "I was waiting," he said. "For what?" "For you to want the same thing." She stood slowly, the boards creaking beneath her. "I do," he turned. "Then I reckon we've both waited enough." She stepped toward him, sunlight catching the curve of her neck, the line of her shoulder as it met the fabric of her dress. He reached out, brushed his thumb along her wrist where the skin was unscarred and warm. "Do you want to grow old here?" he asked, voice low. "With you?" He nodded once. "Yes," she said, steady as daylight. "I do." They married on the first Sunday after the summer solstice. No preacher, just Hayes' hand in hers and the cottonwoods tall behind them. He'd cleared a space by the hive, where the bees moved in slow spirals and the grass grew thick. She wore a dress she'd pieced together from linen found in the attic, and he'd carved 2 simple rings from a strip of seasoned juniper. They spoke no vows, just looked at one another until the quiet filled with meaning. He placed the ring on her finger, and the world around them seemed to still. That night they shared bread and roast with a neighbor couple, old friends of Hayes' father who'd driven in with a basket of apples and a bottle of sweet corn whiskey. No speeches were made, just laughter, whether talk, and the hush that comes when 2 people are seen as something whole. Afterward, Beatrice stood by the window as Hayes banked the fire. She turned when he came to her, his hand gentle at her back. "I used to think love was something you had to chase," she said. "And now I think it's what stays when the chasing's done." He kissed her, slow and deep, not rushed or hungry, but full of the kind of knowing that comes from watching someone rise each morning and choose the same place, the same life, the same quiet yes, years past. They added a second room to the house the following spring, then a third when the child came. A daughter, born in the hush before dawn, with Hayes' steady eyes and Beatrice's quiet mouth. They named her Clara, after the woman who'd taught Beatrice to mend cloth before she could read. Hayes built her a cradle from pine he felled himself. Beatrice lined it with muslin she'd stitched in the evenings, her fingers full of memory and care. They taught Clara the names of trees, how to read weather in the sky, and how to listen for bees before you saw them. She learned to ride before she could write and spent her days in the fields her parents had once walked alone. In the evenings, Hayes still brought in ledger books, and Beatrice kept the jars lined and labeled. The house held laughter now, and the porch grew soft with stories. They grew older not suddenly, but by slow degrees. The land changed around them, as it always had, but they remained, rooted and steady. And though the scar along Beatrice's face never faded, it became no more remarkable than a line on a hand or the curve of a smile. It was simply part of her, like the way she hummed when she hung laundry or the way she pressed her palm to Hayes' chest before sleep. They loved, not in grand declarations, but in the way their boots stood side by side near the door, in the hush of shared mornings, in the work they did together without asking. And when they sat on the porch in the evenings, hands clasped, watching Clara chase fireflies across the yard, neither of them ever forgot what it had taken to arrive at peace. But they never spoke of the old wounds again. They no longer needed to.